Join the Ungovernables. No filters, no apologies. This season, we're cracking open Uniswap governance. Welcome to a new episode of the Ungovernable Podcast.
Welcome to a new episode of the Ungovernable Podcast. Today, we're joined by Dakota and Seth from Bunni, one of the most exciting projects building on top of UniV4. We're Joe and Austin from AlphaGrowth, your premier DeFi operations and growth firm. Guys, what else should the listeners know about you?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, our focus is on helping LPs have a better experience. So hopefully that's getting some people's ears ringing out there. And on top of that, I am lead of growth over at Bunni. You'll catch me in the Discord more often than not. And I think Zeth might be frozen still. So I'm happy to kind of give an intro to him while he gets caught up. Zeth is the man behind the scenes that's keeping everything moving. He leads our front end development, and you will often see him doing shadowy coder activities. He is a founder of Bunni, I don't want to gush about him too much, but is one of the most underrated devs in our industry, if I have to say so myself. Actually, that he might be back.
Hey guys, sorry, lag spike. Happy to be on here. Yeah, I'm one of the founders of Bunni and do a lot of the front-end dev work and making sure contracts get hooked up to user experience.
I appreciate the intro, guys. I'm kind of curious for you, Dakota, what really drew you into the world of crypto and ultimately stepping into DeFi?
Well, what a question. Okay, well, I got into crypto after being short the stock market right before COVID started. And so I moved from being short to trying to look for the fastest horse in the race, right? The timing just couldn't have worked out better. It got me into Bitcoin, and pretty much right away, the degenerate in me saw, oh, wow, these things trade 24/7. And so I started digging into that more and more. As I got further down the DeFi funnel, I found this really cool project called 88MPH, and I always want to bet on myself, right? I want to be involved, and I messaged one of their founders, and he was crazy enough to let me help. He basically told me I could start by answering questions in the Discord, which I now know is the most basic activity you can possibly do, but I took it really seriously and didn't let a question go unanswered that, even if I didn't know the answer, I was going to go try to find it. And just grew one day at a time with these guys. And it's a huge takeaway in DeFi that if you work, you can do a lot of cool things.
Yeah, I always find that it's super interesting too, because you get protocol aligned, right? From the get-go, when you're answering questions in the chat, you're going to learn so much about what folks are building on the team, and then when you're integrated, it just makes a smooth experience for everybody, and you all have those incentives aligned to make sure you're fruitful in your endeavors.
Yeah, if you didn't cut your teeth as a Discord mod, are you actually in DeFi?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I think so. It took me a while to be able to accept the risk, right? Once you start understanding, okay, this can go bad, that gets you enter this dark place. But after you move out of that stage and you see the upside that comes with DeFi, I think it's kind of hard to ignore after you see it. So I think I would be involved.
There's a whole lot of potential. Seth, how did you go from economics to smart contracts and front ends?
I've been interested in crypto for a long time. I got introduced to Bitcoin probably in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. Basically started dollar cost averaging in from 2015 onwards, and then did an AI startup, which is probably about 5 years too early, which is effectively the same thing as being wrong. And kind of got my interest re-peaked in crypto kind of at the tail end of DeFi summer. Like Compound was my introduction to the world of DeFi. Started learning about things like Uniswap, and I just went down a rabbit hole. Like I'm still in it. I can't get out of it. I just like consumes 100% of my brain space right now, and that started COVID as well. And kind of like Dakota, got introduced to it via the 88 MPH product. Loved the idea of fixed yield. There was like a lot of speculation in the product itself. People loved it. It was growing. And like Dakota, I kind of just reached out and was like, hey, do you guys need any help writing code? And they started sending me like project work. Slowly, that just built up over time until like we just rewrote the entire product for like the next V3. And it's kind of history from there.
Was there ever a moment that either of you came to of this whole thing is broken, let's go fix it?
In terms of the product itself or just like the system?
The system.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think it's still broken. Like when you have a Chase bank account or a Bank of America account and your savings account pays you like 0.008% and you can earn 3% on Compound. It was just like, what is going on here? Because the existing system is just screwing me and DeFi is not.
Dakota, anything to add there?
Oh man, I could kick the tires on this topic for a while. I'm gonna say that there's clearly plenty to get fixed, and I hope that I can make a little impact on that.
Yeah, and we're creating more and more problems every day, right? But high level, I think we've done some pretty cool things, especially to limit the size of the average savings account. That's the end goal, and to maximize the supply on Compound and these other money markets, I think is a pretty solid goal. Walk us through. Go ahead, Seth.
I was going to say the space just like is hyper focused on all of these like problems that we experience, and they certainly are there. I think what we sometimes miss is that none of these problems would exist without kind of the success we've had in the last few years. Like if most of the things that we're talking about now weren't even problems 3 years ago. So I think we need to kind of reflect on how we've grown as an industry and what kind of good things have come out of it thus far to get us to this point and not hyper focus on the bad stuff.
I heard an awesome quote the other day from an old friend. She said, "I miss math, problems with answers." And I think the crypto space is very good at answers looking for problems, right? But to your point, I think we have evolved tremendously, and we're only gonna keep cooking. And as the ball rolls, we break new things, and new things will be needed to be fixed. Let's jump over to Bunni. So Bunni, I remember Bunni early on, very cool concept, and now we're at V2. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So give us a TLDR on V1, the problem you guys were solving, and what kind of success you had, and then we can talk about V2 and how it's leveraging V4.
Yeah, I can take this one, Dakota. So Bunni kind of started out as a completely separate product called Timeless, and you can kind of think about Timeless similar to Pendle, although you can have this concept of yield tokens where you're splitting the yield into kind of a fixed and variable amount, I suppose. The difference between Pendle and Timeless was that while Pendle has kind of expiry dates, Timeless didn't. It was just perpetual yield token protocol. And it worked pretty well, but we've kind of failed to generate interest there because a lot of the Pendle success kind of stems from point speculation. At least that's my opinion. And because we don't have fixed expiries, nobody could do that with Timeless. But all that aside, Bunni was kind of born out of necessity for the Timeless product. We really needed a way to incentivize liquidity for our yield token pairs on Uniswap V3. And there wasn't a really good way to do that. So Bunni basically started as basically a curve style vote lock token to incentivize liquidity of the gauges for our own yield token pairs. I mean, that's why we built it, and that's why it existed in its V1 form. We kind of quickly realized that people wanted the V1 Bunni product more than they wanted the timeless product. Just they wanted this gauge system on top of Uni V3. And so we really leaned into that concept for a while. I think there's a lot of problems with gauge systems and vote lock tokens, but it kind of showed a spark of interest from our community and attracting new community members. Once Uniswap kind of announced V4, we realized pretty quickly that this is a dev platform, and it really opens up the design space for dexes. And we were kind of in a unique position where we're already building stuff on top of Uniswap. We're really familiar with the code base and how it works and have contacts within the ecosystem, and decided it would be a good idea for us to build a really advanced DEX with a bunch of different features, and try to be the first one to market on top of Uni V4. And that leads us to Bunni V2 and where we're at today.
And you guys have had a pretty seamless transition, at least from the outside, and I think have captured a lot of early success. I think one feature that you guys have that I'm super excited about is rehypothecation. Would love to hear your perspective on rehypothecation, maybe just like a TLDR, and how that fits into the larger picture for Bunni. And
yeah, well, for those who are maybe unfamiliar with the term, rehypothecation, at least in the terms of a DEX, would kind of mean if you have liquidity that's not being actively used to process swaps, for example, like a full range Uni V2 style position, most of the liquidity is idle and being unused. We would just take that idle liquidity and rehypothecate it to a money market like Aave or Compound or Morpho or Euler, while I'm just naming people, and let the LPs earn yield on that idle liquidity. And depending on the asset pair that you're thinking about or using and where that idle liquidity is being rehypothecated to, you could, double, triple, 10x the yield that LPs see if they were only earning fees from swaps. So it can really juice LP yields pretty dramatically.
oh yeah, I feel like the efficiency as well too, right? You have oftentimes a lot of liquidity in either direction that could be used a little bit more appropriately, whether it's you're not in the right ticker, not in the right range for a DEX. And then on the other side, if you're providing, you're lending out on a lend and borrow, you could be earning a little bit more yield if you're able to jump back in on those swaps to effectively earn more yield. How do you guys see this changing the game for liquidity providers, and will we be seeing more of this in the future as DeFi evolves?
I think it's table stakes at this point. If you're not offering rehypothecation to your LPs, you're going to lose. Like you see this with Balancer V3, like they have a rehypothecation component for their LPs. I'm not exactly sure how it works under the hood. The way Bunni works is you can rehypothecate to any ERC 4626. So we're built on top of existing standards that most projects use. I think if you're just not going to offer this, you're an inferior product.
I think that's a good way to look at it too, especially if you're going to generate more yield, create more capital efficiency, put idle liquidity to work, you're in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to your other features for Bunni, what are you guys most excited about that you're cooking from your side?
I think everyone probably has a different answer depending on what they care about most. From my perspective, I think kind of shape-shifting liquidity is the most interesting, where you can kind of predefine liquidity curves for the entire pool, and that curve can be updated and changed over time based on different parameters. For example, Oracle prices or deviation from the time weighted average price and all kinds of things where, maybe you have a uniformly distributed liquidity curve and, as the spot price of the pool approaches the peg price, it kind of concentrates it more around that peg price, all happening autonomously. You can do the same thing for, Uniswap V4, V3 position, but you have to do that all manually. And Bunni can just do that automatically for you. You deposit and let the pool do its thing.
Oh, that's super exciting. What about you, Dakota? What's your perspective on that? What are you most excited about for Bunni?
So I'm going to start by saying those are, he took a really good one, and Rehypothecation is already a really good one. Bunni has like a ton of different levers you can pull to do cool things. Dynamic fees is another really interesting one that I'm excited about. Essentially, you can set the fee low to be competitive in an environment where impermanent loss isn't going to be as big of a problem. And then when volatility occurs, you can get paid more for that. It creates a little bit, for me, it's easier to add liquidity in a situation like that where you're kind of hedged a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are really cooking up a whole suite in terms of V4 hooks and all the possibilities and capabilities there.
Real quick, Zach, Dakota, when you were saying how this rehypothecation feature is going to enable 2, 5, 10 times the fees essentially that you can generate, what does that look like in APR terms? If I'm just a liquidity provider looking for, bottom line yield, what are we talking about on like a USDC, USDT pool on mainnet or Unichain or something like that? What kind of, with using Bunni rehypothecation, what kind of APR could I expect?
Sure. So just to simplify it as much as possible, you can kind of think of a USDC, USDT pool that's maybe split 50-50. So 50% USDC, 50% USDT. And let's say we send all the idle assets to Aave, for example. The rates on Aave today are like 3, 4, 5%. Let's just say they're 4% for both assets, just for ease of example. We take about 90% of the assets in the pool and send them outbound to Aave. So if you're going to earn 4% on both of those assets, you're maybe going to get 3.6% juice in yield just from sending those assets to Aave. And that's on top of all the swap fees you're going to earn. So if we need to withdraw assets from Aave to process swaps, we're going to do that just in time to facilitate swaps like the assets were held in the pool to begin with.
It's very cool.
So I don't know what the yield is on that kind of pair on Uniswap today, but 3.6 to 4% extra sounds pretty good to me.
It's kind of interesting. I remember taking some like supply chain logistics courses back in college, and it's kind of funny how like all of the inventory management optimization is pretty much what the liquidity ecosystem is evolving into. Like the word just in time, right? That comes from like an inventory management strategy to have perfect efficiency of your inventory and your cash flows and your balance sheets to make sure that you can deliver, but you don't have a lot of idle inventory when you could be putting that capital to work elsewhere. So sorry, quick little aside, I digress. While we're on the topic of buzzwords, talk about liquidity density functions, because that was a new one for me. I'd love to hear you guys explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, liquidity density functions are just pieces of code that define the curve of the liquidity. So for Uniswap V2, for example, that would be a full range uniformly distributed liquidity density function. The same liquidity density function can be used for a uniformly distributed position that is concentrated between $1 and $2. There are different types of liquidity density functions that we can use as building blocks to build more and more complex liquidity density functions. This might be like a geometric curve where it's concentrated on one side of the position and less concentrated on the other side of the position. Something like you're providing a lot of liquidity at the peg price for a stablecoin and less liquidity if the stablecoin depegs, for example. All of these are meant to be building blocks, so you can kind of combine liquidity density functions with other liquidity density functions to create more and more complex liquidity shapes and curves that can change over time or with different parameters like I mentioned earlier. So that's what we think of as liquidity density functions. And yeah, it can get as complex or as simple as you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to get too technical. I'm sure we could go down a rabbit hole, no pun intended there, for Bunni and deep dive. I guess from your perspective, Zeth, like what's important? I think as we've moved from like V2, where it became super easy to like be a liquidity provider, even for like retail, how important is liquidity density functions for like retail now as like not an experienced user coming into Uni V3 or Uni V4? What's important for them to note, and what's important for them to like take away, even if it's at a high level?
Liquidity density functions are really meant to abstract away a lot of the complexity of effectively being a market maker for your average DeFi user. Like I'm probably mid-curve, like I don't have the knowledge or the capacity to like really analyze a specific token pair and provide liquidity in a really tight range and be profitable all the time. Like it's really time consuming and expensive to do, and most people just don't have the skills to do it. Liquidity density functions basically just outsource that type of expertise to the protocol or a curator who creates their own LDF. So you as just your average user can deposit liquidity just like Uni V2 and get all the benefits of a really complex liquidity market making strategy.
Gotcha. So it's almost like an ALM in a way, automated liquidity manager in that fashion.
Yeah, exactly. Except it's all on chain.
Gotcha. Okay. Very, very interesting. For like an average user going to Bunni, like what types of pools would you point them towards if they were, maybe a little bit experienced in DeFi, but still relatively new?
I think obvious answer there is probably stablecoin pairs. Bunni is part of this Uniswap Foundation incentives program where we have a USDC, USDT pool that's being incentivized by the Uniswap Foundation on Unichain. This provides liquidity in a really tight range and concentrated around the swap price of the pool. I would suggest people kind of check that out because we send idle assets outbound to go earn extra yield from various places, and you get all the benefits of really tight liquidity provision as well without the scary risks of things like impermanent loss. So I would check out stablecoin pairs to start and slowly branch your way out to maybe LST pairs and eventually kind of the meme coin pairs that can be ultra volatile.
Are there any double dip opportunities right now? So for instance, the concentrated liquidity that's being incentivized by Unichain, and then also the rehypothecated idle assets that are being supplied on a money market, is that also being incentivized to where you're able to earn Uni rewards on two different fronts?
Oftentimes, yes. The logistics for actually getting those rewards distributed correctly can be a little confusing. I don't want to say too many bad things about different projects that are popular, but a lot of these incentives on money markets like Euler and Aave, they use off-chain kind of mechanisms like Merkle or their own Merkle trees to distribute these rewards, and that doesn't fit really well with the fully on-chain system. So the short answer is yes. Like if Morpho vaults are being incentivized and you're using those, like you will earn Morpho rewards. We still need to connect the dots to make sure our LPs are getting those Morpho rewards.
Sure. Understandable. All right. So you guys were one of the first noteworthy hook projects. And there's been quite a bit of talk around how each hook is essentially just a new protocol in a lot of ways. At least it shares a lot of the same struggles and tribulations as launching a new protocol. First of all, would you guys agree with that? As a team that's actually built one, would you agree that building a V4 hook is essentially the same thing as launching a new protocol?
I think yes and no. Without getting too technical, the Uniswap V4 codebase allows hooks to use the default Uniswap swap math, or you can be what's called a no-op hook, where you ignore the Uniswap swap math and define your own swap math. In the case of, the default of using Uniswap V4 swap math, I think you are not your own DEX. Like, you will get native routing through the Uniswap front end, and it'll be a lot easier for aggregators to pick you up because you don't have a lot of custom swap math and logic that they need to figure out. For Bunni and for other no-op hooks, it is like defining your own DEX. You need to do all the groundwork for aggregator integrations and routing and getting swappers to actually swap through your pools. That's been the biggest challenge for us, for sure. And I think it's going to be the biggest challenge for hooks, broadly speaking, in the Uniswap V4 ecosystem.
What aspect of building and launching this hook was easier than you expected it to be? It's okay if it was all really hard.
That's what I was gonna say. I feel like it's been a grind. Like, it's been rewarding, and like, we're taking these things down, right? And I think it's like stealth mode, but we're live, because a lot of integrations, like he was talking about the aggregator stuff, like they're slowly coming online, but we're also seeing that in like CoinGecko, CoinMarketCap, Dex Screener, all those one by one have to be individually done, right? And so it has been a grind, and it's going to be exciting to see these kind of come on and wave after wave kind of surprise people that that's their main way to get information. Oh, look at Bunni, they actually are doing this. When you see you're not on CoinGecko, or the data is not showing up on DeFi Llama properly one day, it's easy to overlook. But then when you dig into the details and you realize that, in fact, the data is much better than what it currently looks like, it's going to be good in a lot of ways, but it is a grind. I can't think of anything that's been terribly easy. We've gotten support from the Uniswap greater community, probably more with our V2 than our V1, which has been really cool. It's probably the easiest thing I can think of.
I will say, from a technical perspective, the V4 singleton architecture has been really nice. It makes things really easy to deal with when you're kind of doing, accounting on our end is just a single contract you have to interact with and keep track of, versus a bunch of different pool contracts. And the gas costs are massively reduced. I know, like, Hayden and others like constantly are harping on this, and it is definitely true. Like, I don't think people give them enough credit for what they did on the gas savings front.
And maybe, Seth, too, if you could give like a little TLDR for listeners, what the singleton architecture is.
Yeah, sure. So I guess maybe let's start with V3 and how V3 worked. V3 basically had a factory contract where if you deployed a new pool, it would create a new contract for each pool that you would need to keep track of and interact with if you wanted to, swap through a pool or deposit liquidity into a pool. And this changed dramatically with V4 and the singleton architecture, where instead of a factory contract that's kind of generating new contracts for each pool basically just has an identifier, and all of the assets for all pools live in a single contract. And this just allows for a lot better efficiency when it comes to moving tokens around, because you can just track basically transitory storage slots for token balances for different addresses in the singleton contracts, and then settle everything up at the end. And it makes like multi-pool hop swaps a lot cheaper. It makes arbitrage a lot cheaper. It makes everything cheaper. Plus, you kind of have a significantly reduced gas cost for deploying pools, which makes this just more accessible for people.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a master architecture where you're really interfacing instead of with your V3, you're going to be interfacing with dozens or hundreds of different contracts. Now you can interface with one to get to those different contracts, if I got that right.
Yeah, you can kind of like, I think the best way to think about this is via flash loans. In V3, for a flash loan, you need to flash loan assets from a specific pool, and you're kind of limited to the amount of assets in that pool for kind of your flash loan size. In V4, you can flash loan from the singleton contract, and you can flash loan 100% of whatever token you want that exists in this pool contract. So you could have 1,000 different USDC, USDT pools, and you could flash loan assets from all 1,000 of them in the same transaction.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that's going to make things a whole lot easier and a whole lot cheaper. Do you feel that there becomes any security risk when you start talking about like V4 hooks? I'm sure with all these different projects building all these different V4 hooks, do you worry, like in the greater scheme of things, that there's going to be more security vulnerabilities when it comes to the V4 hook side of things?
I think the answer has to be yes. Like each hook is going to have its own code that needs to be audited, and it's going to have its own security vulnerabilities. I think we've already seen some hooks, V4 hooks, get hacked. Bunni also had a vulnerability in a previous version of our code that our third auditor caught, and we were able to fix just recently. So I think you still need to do your diligence and get your code audited, preferably multiple times, in order to avoid a lot of these worst case scenarios. I think like all of the problems related to flash loans and market manipulation can potentially get worse too, because you're just able to access such large pools of capital in the V4 model compared to previous models that it could just unlock a huge can of worms just because of the size that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think, like you said too, the design space with hooks is just so vast, which is a benefit, but also can be a little bit of a curse when it comes to making sure that all your ducks are in a row.
Yeah. It's also fragmentary. Like, with the Uniswap V2, it's just a single pool. You know what pool you're swapping through for a specific asset pair. And like I said, there could be 1,000 different pools for the same exact token pair in the V4 model. So liquidity just gets fragmented like crazy.
Yeah, if you were going to redesign everything, I think that's a good point, because like as Joe was saying, you have that cold start problem with hooks, right? And you have this fragmentation. Like if you were Uniswap, how might you design things differently with hooks in mind?
I think having a single pool for a single asset pair makes a lot of sense, but people want to do different things with their positions. So if each position within a pool could be defined by a liquidity density function, and all of the swaps kind of go through the same pool, like you could have a really interesting design space from a position, like a user liquidity position standpoint, while maintaining all of the benefits of having that liquidity in the same place and not fragmented across thousands of pools. I would have moved in that direction. Obviously, hindsight is 2020.
You raise a good problem though, that I think there's still some opportunity, whether that's going to be an aggregation layer or maybe otherwise. Maybe we can solve the $1 million problem right now. What if you've got 1,000 different pools? Let's just say USDT, USDC pools, and each one has a different amount of liquidity. Each one obviously has different knobs and dials that have been turned. That's the whole point of V4 in the first place, is you can customize this, but with that customization, you're jeopardizing liquidity depth. So what would be a way that maybe someone's already doing this, or maybe that's the point that you brought up about the aggregators. How can you visualize all of the USDT, USDC liquidity in one go? Is that already in existence today? Is there already a front end where you can interface with the entirety of the liquidity that exists versus just one by one in each V4 hook?
I think the answer is no. From my perspective, aggregators have been really slow on integrating UniV4. I know of plenty of really large aggregators that still have yet to integrate unhooked Uniswap V4 liquidity, which is crazy to me. Like that should have been done on day one. And for each hook, like Bunni, like you're going to have to, write specific logic for the Bunni hook to have a visualization and understanding of all of the liquidity that sits in Bunni pools. So unless there's an aggregator that's really done the groundwork so far, I would shout out like 0x. They've been really great on integrating V4 and V4 hooks really rapidly. This might not exist today. And because of the fragmentation, I think all of these different pools that are created via hooks or otherwise are effectively competing against each other. Even the pools within Bunni for the same asset pairs are competing against each other for the same swap volume. So may the best hook win.
Yeah, no, may the best, I think, yeah, with the rules of the game today, I think the only thing you can say is that, right? May the best hook win. But do you think that that's sustainable? Do you think that that's going to be the most conducive path to a successful, sustainable ecosystem?
I think it depends. Like, I know Unichain has this vision of being the liquidity layer for a lot of L2s, especially if we get interop and different things on the L2 fronts. And in that case, because the gas costs are so low and everything is concentrated there, that maybe won't impact things too much. But for a chain like mainnets, I think a lot of this fragmentation is just going to be bad in the short term, and I don't know if it's solvable by aggregator integrations. I think it's just potentially worse for swappers unless there just emerges a really dominant hook or a dominant pool that's just obviously the best for LPs that all of the liquidity gets attracted to.
And of course you can also make the argument, depending on which side of the field you're standing on, if you are trying to sell volatility and you're trying to create a lucrative arbitrage engine, if there are 1,000 different USDC pools, then there's a lot of arbitrage opportunities, right? If 1,000 ETH pools, there's a lot of arbitrage opportunities just within. You don't even have to leave V4, and you can basically plug all of these things into each other. Buy here, sell there, buy there, sell here. And I think that would obviously stimulate volume. So the liquidity fragmentation, there is a strong, a Steelman argument for why that does actually help with the kinetic energy of an ecosystem, right? So I guess there is a silver lining to that.
I think you have to be careful with that because we know that arbitrage is or can be really bad for LPs. And this is one of the reasons like V3 has been pretty terrible for your average LP, is because they're just getting rinsed by arbitrageurs. And so I don't know if introducing more arbitrage than existed previously is necessarily a good thing for LPs. Potentially it's a good thing for Uniswap, but
right.
Yeah.
I'd like to, first of all, I love the word rinse. That's phenomenal. I'd love for you to speak a little bit more on that, because I know that I'm not saying, hey, arbitrageurs, come here, there's this opportunity. That's just identified on chain. They don't need me to tell them where to go. But and I think it's going to happen if the opportunity exists. If it can't happen, it will happen. If you don't mind explaining a little bit more about why it is that these V3 LPs are getting rinsed, so to say, and what that looks like.
Yeah, you can kind of think about it mainnet is probably the best example because the block times are slow, where, on every block, you potentially have a pool price or an asset price that's 12 seconds out of date relative to Binance, for example. And so some arbitrager is going to buy on Binance and sell through your Uniswap pool, and you, the LP, are effectively losing the difference in value. You're basically just allowing people to trade at a stale price. I think there's like a grand debate about this with faster block times in the Solana world or on the L2s. Like, does this improve the situation for LPs or not? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend like I do have the answer. I do think what V4 does on that front is allows developers like Bunni or other hook teams that we know of to experiment with ways to mitigate that. For example, in Bunni, you can actually override the price of a pool for a swap. So you could, have an oracle, maybe a Chainlink oracle that connects to a pool that says, hey, only quote swaps at the price of the Chainlink oracle. And so you're probably reducing or mitigating some of the arbitrage opportunity that can happen by doing this. I don't know if it's going to be perfect or enough to really make it better for LPs.
I think that's a great way to look at an experiment with it too, right? Is there any other ways in your mind, Zeth, like how we could protect liquidity providers? Because I know that the big thing, even for V3 and permanent loss, especially, was a difficult aspect for people to want to actually stay in UniV2, UniV3 implementation.
Yeah, I think impermanent loss is different. Like impermanent loss is a constant of the universe when it comes to concentrated liquidity. It's just unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
For other like LVR mitigation mechanisms, there are like so many different designs that are basically in the research phase right now. Like there's very few implementations of things live in prod. And things that I've seen are like dynamic fee hooks that adjust the fee based on the priority fee of the transaction. So if you're an arbitrager, you're going to pay a really high priority fee to get your swap included first in the block. The pool might charge you a higher fee when you do this relative to a swapper who, doesn't care about their order in the block. So there's things like this that can help mitigate LVR, which is loss versus rebalancing. Bunni has implemented a specific design called auction managed AMM. I can't remember who wrote the paper on this. I want to say it was like Austin Adams or Dan Robinson or one of these guys. Basically auctioning off the right to set and collect swap fees from a pool in exchange for paying rent to LPs. And what this is meant to do is kind of kick off a bidding war where informed actors will pay up to the amount of value that they're getting from swap fees. And the thought process here is that by introducing this competitive mechanism, you can effectively return like 90 to 100% of the LVR back to LPs. While still having kind of a profitable actor to make sure that this happens. So those are kind of like the two design mechanisms I'm aware of right now that are being used. I'm sure there's others. I know like Sorella has an interesting concept. I don't think they're live yet. Really curious to see what happens once they do launch. But yeah, I think the design space is really nascent and we'll see what happens.
And I'm sure we'll see a lot more solutions coming too. So I appreciate Zeth for going down the rabbit hole there and doing a deep dive for all the functionality and functions for liquidity and what you guys are doing there. I wanted to hit on growth for a little bit, maybe throw this over to Dakota. How is Bunni looking at and tackling growth?
Yeah, so these guys have made my life pretty easy, right? Like there's so many different, like I said, there's so many different levers we can pull to help the end user get the product they want. From a protocol to protocol perspective, we can go in there with programmable liquidity via these LDFs and help them solve any problems they have. we're just a hair too early. As we mentioned, we just kind of started our reboots. If you're listening to this, check out our feed, and you're going to see a lot of good examples of this coming out in real time, hopefully. That said, rehypothecation is like the lowest hanging fruit. That one we can explain pretty quickly. So how do you get LPs if you're not using protocol and liquidity? Well, a lot of times you have to incentivize for that, right? Something like Bunni with rehypothecation allows you to kind of get involved at a fair price, which you spend a little bit for migration incentives in some cases to get people excited, but we get LPs in the door, and then we can use something like rehypothecation, say 4% on Aave, to scale up LPs without just destroying that APY. It's going to take a lot of liquidity in a pool to start influencing the APYs that you're going to see for blue chip pairs on Euler, Aave, etc. So that's probably the easiest example. We also make things really simple for protocols with different things like flexible ways to add those incentives. If you want to make a big number pop, you can set it up in like a liquidity mining way that you would see normally, 400% APY at launch. That gets diluted over time, but we can also hook it up where it's 4% fixed rate over up to a certain amount of TVL. So programmable liquidity down to the very last detail, and adding more every day makes growth pretty easy at Bunni.
Oh, I'm sure. So when it comes to like having this flywheel and really retaining that liquidity, I know you said you're kicking things off with incentives to get that migration to happen. What's that next phase for your flywheel look like to keep liquidity there?
To keep liquidity after it's already been migrated over, I would say making sure that we have good curators for pools. We have also kind of flipped things internally where we went from using a referral link program to drive liquidity that way to more of a curator focused setup. I guess it's not live yet, so a little bit of alpha leakage there. But if we build the pool correctly, it makes it a lot easier for the liquidity to stay there, right? Like you have to, if our competitors are offering a better rate and security is a variable that isn't considered in this case, then we're in trouble. We have to make sure that we're building good stuff so that people, prefer us. It's really just a numbers thing. I think if you're there to make money, let's make sure we're giving you the best option.
Yeah, I always feel like I think somebody said to me once that financial products at the end of the day are just yield, and however high compared to their risk tolerance is the way you want to be able to offer it, and you can outpace somebody in that direction. I think with your rehypothecation, especially like you said, low hanging fruit, it's almost the flywheel in itself. So super excited for you guys to continue to have these partnerships and incentivize and grow that liquidity. I did want to ask from the Uniswap side, whether this DAO Foundation Labs, how do you feel like Uniswap can help, whether this is Bunni or other V4 hook builders grow?
From a growth perspective and being a relatively small bootstrapped project, it's always nice to have co-marketing support. Making sure that we're getting new eyes on what we're building is top of funnel, easiest way to get reps in, understand what we need to change, understand what we're doing right. Aside from that, just continuing to build out these technical friction points related to aggregators. I think those two things really kind of open plenty of doors to see which hooks are solving problems.
Do you guys have plans of a DAO, or do you already have a DAO?
We are. There's already a governance token that you can get via Bunni.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What's been your experience with DAO governance?
Internally or externally, or just all this? It
Yes.
chaos, right? It's been a learning curve for me personally that I'm still working my way up. I would say that I think there are a lot of problems in DAO governance, but externally speaking, Uniswap's doing a good job of getting reps in and figuring out what's working and what's not, and helping us solve those issues. It's an easy way to get paralysis by analysis. You jump into a new protocol and you want to get involved with all these different governance activities, and it can get pretty wild. From our perspective, I would say that making sure you have good actors in your ecosystems a high priority, especially for a new protocol. We've had at least one or two different occasions where someone's come in and potentially didn't have, their goals weren't necessarily aligned with what ours were. So it's going to happen. I would say that's probably, if you were building a new protocol, that was probably one of the things I'd be aware of from like a DAO perspective is know who's growing in influence inside of your ecosystem.
And how has it been having, because you guys are built on top of Uniswap protocol, Uniswap ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, and then you have an independent DAO. Was there ever a world where you guys thought about kind of creating more of like a sub DAO? I know that would be arguably more chaotic in some ways, but because you're so dependent on the platform itself, was that ever a thought of yours?
That specific thing hasn't come up inside of our community. Our community does a pretty good job of keeping up with what's going on over at Uniswap. Every day we do seem to become more and more like closely aligned with what's going on over there. So hopefully that continues, and conversations like that, we can get them in front of everybody and see what they think.
And do you guys, as a key hook builder, are you guys pretty active? Do you have like someone at Bunni who's leading governance efforts over at the Uniswap DAO to make sure that your voice is heard?
So that probably falls on me, which we're a small team. We have a lot of moving parts. As we become closer and closer, more connected, I should say, with the ecosystem over there, we are paying more and more attention. There's a proposal, I think it just went to Snapshot, for a technical advisory board. We would be a part of that. So we're growing.
Would you say that reasonably speaking, your voice has been heard?
Yes.
Good. That makes me happy to hear, because I know there's a lot of voices.
Definitely,
yeah, there's a lot of people talking.
There's a lot of people talking, and each of us can also say a lot, right? But when it comes down to the most important things, 9 times out of 10, if it's important enough, we can get feedback and get the ball rolling as needed. Sometimes it takes a little bit more work, and I think that's part of what's daunting about, another thing that's daunting about governance in general is, oh man, like who are all these people? I didn't get a response on my question. Like what do I do from here? So yeah, we've been heard. I think the technical advisory board is going to help a lot. We'll see.
And what would you say is the most controversial opinion that you have about V4 and V4 hooks? And you're allowed to have whatever opinion you want, because you guys are right there in the thick of it.
I think when you step back and you look at how things have rolled out, Uniswap as an ecosystem has a lot of moving parts, and taking a shot at the largest group, which is probably about as controversial as you can get. Like just general people watching from the sidelines, there's been a lot of push on like how the cadence of things have unfolded. I think there's a lot of moving parts, and where we're going to end up is going to be a lot better than where we started. And it might not have. It's been a little bit of a bumpy ride to get things up and running. You know, I point back to the aggregators, right? Like it would have been really nice to have those all up and running day one. So it's been slower than I would have liked, but not from. Everyone's excited. It's like we're waiting for the lights to come on for the party, and I think it's getting there. It's hook season, right?
Yes, without a doubt. So now as Uniswap is more of a platform and an ecosystem than just a protocol, in the next 12 months, what would you say is your biggest wish for the Uniswap ecosystem?
I want to see. There was a proposal. I mean, I guess it was the Uniswap Unleashed proposal. My wish is that their goals and that proposal come true. I think if they hit on and execute on their goals, that's about as much as we can ask for at this point.
Well, guys, I appreciate you guys coming on. Where can people best follow your work and best follow Bunni?
Twitter would be number one. You're probably going to get the information. You're definitely going to get the information faster on our Discord. I know not everyone has time to be in there, but making sure you're following us on Twitter and you turn on those notifications if you can, because we do these rush pools, right, where it's a fixed amount of yield up to a certain amount of TVL. And you don't want to miss that.
All right, bunny.xyz. Be sure to check that out. And that's a wrap of another episode of the Ungovernable Podcast. Guys, I appreciate you guys coming on and joining us today and sharing your insights. For our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to us on Spotify and YouTube. We're dropping new episodes every week. Be sure to follow us on X at Grow Uniswap to stay updated. This has been another episode of the Ungovernable Podcast, and we are Joe and Austin. See you all next week.
This was the Ungovernable Podcast by AlphaGrowth. Watch all our episodes on YouTube or Spotify or weekly live on X.